now, here are your hosts, Janet Hickox and Roger Wetzel.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. Our guest on Empower You TV today is Lynne McTaggart, and she is one of the central voices in the New Consciousness movement. She is the award-winning author of 6 books, including the worldwide bestsellers, The Field, The Intention Experiment, The Bond, and her books are now in some 30 languages. She has won many plaudits, including Kindred Spirit's Spiritual Writer of the Year for 2013, and the Nautilus Awards Best Science Book of 2012. As editorial director of What Doctors Don't Tell You, whose website is www.wddty.com, she publishes one of the world's most highly praised health publications and runs highly popular health and spirituality teleconferences and workshops. What Doctors Don't Tell You was recently voted or awarded Website of the Year for Health and Wellbeing for 2014. Lynne is also the architect of the Intention Experiments, a web-based global laboratory, which was prominently featured in the plotline of Dan Brown's blockbuster, The Lost Symbol. Lynne has also appeared in many documentaries on the science of spirituality, including What the Bleep and Down the Rabbit Hole, The Living Matrix, and I Am. Please join me in welcoming Lynne McTaggart. Hi, Lynne.
Hi.
Hi, Lynne.
Here with you.
Thanks for being here.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Yes, I didn't tell you, the audience, but she is joining us live from London, and we're on the west coast of the United States. So it was wonderful that we could coordinate our schedules and get together. So Lynne, why don't we start by having you tell us a little bit about yourself? And we're going to be talking today about The Bond, how to fix your falling down world. And I want to know, there's an interesting story behind how this book came to be written. So would you share that with us and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Well, my background is originally investigative reporting. I'm a journalist by trade, and I stumbled into this whole area of science and spirituality largely because of my then newsletter, What Doctors Don't Tell You. Our job with the newsletter, which is now a magazine, is to look at what works and what doesn't work in conventional and alternative medicine, and to come up with non-drug alternatives to the things that don't work. And we study the medical literature and decode it and write about it in plain English. And so in the course of doing this, and this is back in the 90s, I kept coming across very good studies of things like spiritual healing. And I kept thinking to myself, and these were scientific studies, that if somebody can have a thought and send it to somebody else and have that person get better, that alone undermines everything we think about how the world works. So that set me on a quest to find out how come this is. And that resulted, after talking with a lot of frontier scientists, I realized and recognized that we are on the brink of a completely new understanding of the way the world works and how we work. And that resulted in my book, The Field. And I went on to look at consciousness as a something, because there was a lot of implication that consciousness is an actual thing with the ability to affect other things. And so I wanted to look at the science of thought and the science of intention, and that resulted in the Intention Experiment. But there was some leftover thing, which is, how do we live this? If this new science really says we're not what we've been told, my real question was, were we meant to be as we are told, which is about, competitive individualism? And what really kicked off The Bond for me was a very personal situation. One of my daughters is very talented in drama, and she had been chosen as the lead role in a school play. One day she came home, and all of a sudden she told me she had been shunted to a more minor role. And I could never get out of her what was the reason until a girlfriend of hers let it slip that when a new director came on board, another girl lied to take the part that had been given to my daughter. And the real horrifying aspect of this was that this girl was my daughter's best friend. And so I was really stunned by this. And so I tried to tactfully bring it up to her mother. And when I did, she kind of turned to me and shrugged her shoulders and said, well, that's life. And I just thought, whoa, well, maybe she's right. Because, yeah, that is the life we adults have created. competitive individualism is every part of, it infiltrates every part of our lives, from the schoolyard to the office to just about everything else. And so that really concerned me. And I started wondering about that. Were we meant to be this competitive? Is this how nature designed us? And so really out of that became the bond. And the resounding answer to that in one word is no. Nature designed us to connect, not to compete.
Interesting. Yeah, we are competitive, and we've been taught all of these things, and it's like we're handed down these ideas and thoughts and beliefs about how life is and who we are, and that, well, that's just how it is. But I have a question for you about the bond. Can you give us a little bit more, can you discuss a little bit more about the science behind the bond?
Sure. What I started looking at was the whole idea of individuality and competition. And first of all, I found out that, we're not anywhere near as an individual as we think we are. From subatomic particles, our very nethermost level of being, through to our relationships with each other, to our relationship with the environment, through, whole societal structures, there is a bond. And by bond, I mean a connection so profound and integral that it's impossible to say where one thing ends and another thing begins. And I found that in the subatomic world, and I also found that in every aspect of our lives, that we actually are always part of a bigger whole, and that we function best when we are part of that greater whole. As I say, nature has designed us in every way to want to be part of something bigger. And when we are, we thrive. And when we aren't, our world starts falling down, which is the problem we have today. Every problem in our world these days is as a result of competitive individualism and of living essentially against nature.
Mm-hmm.
Right. One other thing that I'd like to throw in here, I think that, and you touched on it in your book, was and something that I've had to deal with personally is being depressed and depression. And if you could speak to that just a little bit, because my idea with depression is that we become depressed because we're not on purpose, not focused on what our purpose is as a being on this planet at this time.
Yes. And I think, we get depressed because we also feel like we are separate. It is a profound, visceral feeling of being alienated, and, that there is no purpose. I am not connected. What am I doing? I'm a little lonely person on a lonely planet in a lonely universe, right?
Mm-hmm.
Correct.
And it's been shown by studies that people who are, for instance, in the very lowest level of economic income in the United States don't suffer from depression, even though they have those financial challenges, so long as they have two things. One, a strong spiritual belief, but number two, and most important, a strong spiritual community. And it's been demonstrated over and over again, even with people who have a genetic propensity towards depression. I have this in my book as well. There were studies of two populations, and one of them were the more likely to be depressed. They had a bigger depression gene than the other ones did. Nevertheless, they weren't, because they also had very close social ties, and that prevented them from becoming depressed. So the whole idea of social connection is such a powerful antidote to depression, but also a powerful antidote to just about every illness. They've found, for instance, that heart attack victims, only half of them have the usual markers like high cholesterol. The others, as Dr. Dean Ornish, the heart specialist, discovered, the other half are just lonely. They're just, they literally die of a broken heart. There is such a syndrome called broken heart syndrome, which oftentimes occurs in widows or widowers, who have suddenly lost a partner. The heart is so stunned that it actually literally breaks.
Interesting.
And so there is this thing about connection, but heart attack victims suffer from loneliness, and connection by the reverse prevents a heart attack in many cases, and it also prevents stroke, even the common cold. So connection is one of the best drugs we have.
Definitely.
That's great.
Yeah. One of the most intriguing statements I think that I read through the book is this one, and I'm going to just read it to you from the book. It says, genes get turned on, turned off, or modified by our life circumstances and environment, what we eat, who we surround ourselves with, and how we lead our lives. And, you know, there's a lot of people out there who think that they're maybe predisposed to cancers or heart attacks or what have you because of their genes. But the evidence didn't speak to that. Can you tell us a little bit more about some of the experiments that, or the evidence that you found that isn't necessarily true?
Sure. First of all, you should understand something about what I'm talking about. And it started with an experiment that Randy Jertel, a scientist who is an expert in genetic expression, carried out with a graduate student. Now, the graduate student wanted to see if you could override a certain genetic tendency that was inheritable. And so they decided when you do something like this, you need a genetic quirk of fate. And so they chose a thing called an agouti mice, a group of agouti mice. And agouti mice are mice with a genetic defect that renders them very overweight and also peach colored. And it's always been assumed that once you have an agouti mouse, you always have them because that goes down the familial line, and that they'll all have these genetic defects, and they're destined to live short and brutal lives. So the problem agouti mice have is that they can't process B vitamins. And so what Randy Jertel and his graduate student did was to feed these little mice, the pregnant mice, B vitamins. And when they came to give birth, out came slim brown mice. So when they published their study, this rocked the community, because what they were basically saying is that genetic expression can be overridden. And what they were demonstrating is epigenetic expression. Now, genes, sitting above every gene is a quartet of atoms that are exquisitely sensitive to environmental factors. As you say, the air we breathe, the food we eat, the friends we have, the sum total of how we live our lives, all of these determine whether or not those atoms are pressed, so to speak, and whether they in turn turn on or off genes. You have to think of genes a little bit like the keys of a piano. They sit there silently until they're played. And what plays them are all those environmental factors. Let me give you a human example here. Everybody thinks breast cancer is mainly familial, right? And that it's inherited, and that you've got, you know, look at Angelina Jolie.
Right.
Preemptive strike there with her surgery. But when scientists looked at a great body of evidence called the Women's Health Initiative, this had been a giant study of hundreds of thousands of women, and it was supposedly designed to prove that that HRT, hormone replacement therapy, is safe. So when they did the study, they actually had to stop the study because they discovered it wasn't safe. It was actually dangerous, and that there was a big excess of women who were getting cancer who were taking HRT. But for later researchers, this body of research was a gold mine to sift through for lots of things. And one group of researchers wanted to look at whether or not there was a higher incidence of breast cancer among these patients if they had a family history of breast cancer. So they went through all of this. And what they discovered also rocked the scientific community, because what they found was that a familial history of breast cancer made absolutely no difference in terms of the incidence of breast cancer. The only thing that mattered was whether the women had taken this environmental insult, which was HRT.
Very interesting, huh?
That's really amazing, because then that has all kinds of implications for everything that we do, for everything we eat, the quality of the foods we eat. This reminds me of Bruce Lipton's book, The Biology of Belief, where he shows that, receptors on the cells even respond to the things that we believe to be true. So if we believe, for example, that we're doomed for cancer, let's say, or heart problems, whatever it is, because of our genes, then we could even be creating that situation for ourselves.
Absolutely. And that's the whole point. It's just, belief is one other environmental factor. Your personality comes to bear, everything, mm-hmm. The friends you have and how they feel about things, that all has to do with, that all influences genetic expression. Genes turn on or off depending on how we live our lives.
It's really interesting what you just said a second ago about how our thoughts are also an environmental factor. And we don't even think about that.
No, one of the things that's really interesting about thoughts, and this goes back to some of the work I did in the intention experiment, we think of thoughts as just being encased in the brain. First of all, scientists are demonstrating that we send out a tiny current of light. The body sends out a tiny current of light all the time. All living things do. And other living things send back this light synchronicitously. And this isn't just a weird anomaly. This is now turning into scientific fact. They've also discovered that this light changes when people send intention, for instance, healing intention, that it is, they've actually recorded it coming out of the hands of healers sending intention. Now, here's another little factor. Some scientists are now theorizing that the microtubules of every cell, which are like the little scaffolding holding a cell firm, are light pipes, as they call them. And that this light is going through these microtubules. Now, if you look at an image of a cell, you'll find that it is absolutely swarming with microtubules all over the place, that they are all over the place. They are drenching the cell. And so in a sense, if this is true, and if that light equals thoughts, and if those thoughts are going through these microtubules, well, we're drowning in thoughts all the time. They're covering every part of our body. And so every aspect of our being is getting profoundly influenced by the thoughts we think.
That's amazing.
That is amazing, because there's even thought that our DNA is a transducer of light. And so if the cells are sending light via the thought that you're not good, you're not any good, or you're going to be sick, then the DNA is responding to that thought via the light that's being sent to it.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
That's really very fascinating.
Yeah. And and you're absolutely right about that DNA. The person who discovered these biophoton emissions, as they're called, mm-hmm. The late Fritz Albert Popp, discovered that the light was emanating from DNA. So that, again, has big implications about genes and what's happening to them.
Wow.
So maybe we really are light beings.
We are definitely light beings.
Definitely.
So we should take a break right here, and we'll be right back to continue our interview with Lynne McTaggart.